just to begin, Lieutenant Governor, I just want to ask you to explain how autism insurance coverage worked in Michigan before this reform legislation.
Well, that part is simple. There wasn't coverage before. Before the insurance code was changed last year, virtually every policy in the state of Michigan denied coverage for evidence-based treatment for autism. And what that created was an environment where it was nearly impossible for practitioners to provide that service. And it caused a tremendous shortage in the availability of resources and people that were qualified and trained to provide the central aspect of what kids with autism need in order to develop properly and to gain independence, to make them, or put them in a position to reach their full potential.
And that's why you said Michigan was one of the worst 10 states in the country to raise a child with autism.
A national organization called Autism Speaks went through and evaluated states based on their insurance laws and the nature of their treatment networks and diagnosis and centers of excellence and so forth, all the things that would matter, how education works with autism as well, and determined that Michigan was one of the 10 worst states to be if you had autism. And so that was really a motivating factor for a lot of people to really get engaged to make a difference. And so as we have changed some baseline laws that are required to create an environment where it's possible, the economics around providing autism services work now, that we can expect there to be a treatment network that develops, and that'll make a huge difference overall for our society, for costs in education, for success of people, quality of life, for families that are dealing with autism on a day-to-day basis.
Now, under this new legislation, are insurance companies required to cover these treatments or required to offer coverage? How do those details work?
The way that the insurance code was changed is it says that evidence-based treatments for autism must be covered. And there's some guidelines and limitations to that, but overall it's things like applied behavior analysis, speech therapy, occupational therapy, being kind of the core centerpieces of what is needed. And so those today are provided for kids with autism, and insurance companies that are regulated by the state must provide those coverages the same way that they provide them for anything else. In other words, we simply say you're not allowed to discriminate against people with autism. You have to treat them the same way you treat somebody with heart disease or cancer or any other type of diagnosis.
Now, Michigan was the 30th state to sign something into this law. That's fairly late.
That's right. Michigan was a late adopter to this, unfortunately. The efforts were ongoing for about 6 or 7 years in trying to get it through the process. There was a lot of opposition to changing the insurance code, but it was a big victory that will change the overall course for families dealing with autism, for individuals who have autism, and now will have what they need to give them the best shot at success and independence and a better quality of life in the future. But it will save the state of Michigan billions of dollars. Today, with the scenario where most people with autism don't receive the type of treatment that they need, the state ends up taking care of them, paying for them the rest of their lives. We know that fully half of kids with autism can reach normal or typical function if they receive behavioral therapy and the other types of therapies when they need it and in the quantities that they need. And then another 40% on top of that can show great improvement, and that translates into billions of dollars. Some actuarial studies suggest about $13 billion in savings to the taxpayers of the state of Michigan because of this availability of the treatment, just for our current population with autism.
Wow. When you say that the state ends up paying for these people who haven't had treatment or early intervention, is it through, what do you mean by that?
It's education and then life supports, living supports throughout a person's entire life. And so like during education, today individual or paraprofessionals are required in many cases for people with autism throughout their entire educational experience. So think about that. You take a person whose job is simply to be with a person with autism throughout their 12 years or longer in Michigan education. But if you receive the early intensive intervention before school, when you're 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years, a lot of these kids can be mainstreamed and operate without that type of support throughout the school. And then afterwards, if you can provide the type of support and therapy that kids need, then they can go to college, they can get careers and be independent instead of being dependents of the state for the rest of their life.
Now, was there anything in the federal health care act that spoke to this, and why was it necessary for Michigan to have its own law?
With the federal rules that changed essentially made health care available to more people through an exchange or through an expanded Medicaid program. But for those who still purchase or receive insurance through their employers, those policies aren't affected by the changes that were made in Washington. Furthermore, the changes that were made with the Affordable Care Act were silent on autism. They didn't say whether or not those policies must provide or would provide autism services. Here in Michigan, the exchange policies that are available will provide the same coverage that the rest of our insurance market is required to supply.
Now, before this legislation, it was very costly, and were families often paying out of pocket what they could, paying for however many hours they could afford of these types of treatments, and if they couldn't afford it, they were just not, what were they resorting to? Essentially,
you have two different scenarios. Once you realize that your child has autism, you receive a diagnosis, well, like any other thing, you would think that, okay, now there must be an action plan. We're going to go out and get what we need to make sure that my child has the best shot at success. If you could afford it, you might be able to find a behavioral therapist, except for there were only about 30 in the entire state of Michigan for 15,000 kids.
Only 30?
Only 30. So in that case, even if you had the money to pay for it, they just didn't exist. You literally, no matter what you did, you could have sold your house and said, I'm going to put all of it toward therapy. There wasn't anybody to hire to do the therapy. And so that was the major frustration. Now, but if you had the resources to do it and you could get in with one of those practices, that was possible. So in most cases, though, parents simply relied on schools that are not equipped to provide clinical therapy. And so we have kids that have a label of being autistic or having autism in our public schools that receive some extra support to kind of manage them through the day. But when it comes to clinical behavioral therapy and clinical speech therapy that is necessary for them to achieve the type of results that I talked about before, to reach normal or typical function, schools aren't equipped, and I don't think we can expect them to be equipped to do that sort of therapy. It's medical therapy, really.
The other potential economic impact is that we'd be able to keep or educate therapists, behavioral therapists, occupational therapists, and then keep them here because they know that with this reform, they'll be getting paid and they'll be able to have jobs.
One really cool thing about this is that we already have in the state of Michigan 2 universities that have outstanding behavioral therapy programs. And so there's Western Michigan University and Eastern Michigan University. Both create the professionals that we need. In previous years, you can look at their graduating classes and find that literally 100% of them went out of state for employment. So today, all of those students are going to have opportunity in Michigan to practice if they choose to, and I think many of them will. Furthermore, we need to get in touch with, and there have been efforts to get in touch with, those students that graduated in recent years and went elsewhere to say, it's time for you to come on back home, that there is opportunity for you to practice here, and your state needs you. So it's a multifaceted effort, but at the end of the day, it's more opportunity for Michigan students, and it's great because Western Michigan University in particular has one of the best, arguably the best, autism behavioral therapy program in the nation.
Wow. So we expect to see billions of dollars in savings down the line. What's the cost of this investment?
Up front, it's just a matter of the cost of providing the therapy itself. That's going to range depending on where a child sits on the autism spectrum. Some kids have very mild forms that don't require a lot of support or therapies. Others that are more severe require a lot of intensive volumes of therapy. Sometimes it can be as much as $50,000 per year for an individual. In other cases, it can be close to nothing, just kind of basic peer support. And so when you have a range like that, it's difficult to nail down the exact cost, but I would guess that here in the state of Michigan, that when you consider what's being done in the private sector and the public sector with our Medicaid population and across the board, probably $40 to $50 million worth of services that is what would be required in order to provide what they need. It won't reach that level for several years because we simply don't have the therapists yet to provide the service.
Okay. Now, why was it important for you personally to spearhead this effort?
What I learned a few years ago, or several years ago now, when I was in a health policy committee meeting at the State House of Representatives, I heard testimony on autism, and at that time my wife and I were having so many difficulties with our daughter, who was 2 at the time, and we couldn't find anybody that could help us understand what was happening, why it was different, why everything was so difficult and hard. And when I heard that testimony, a description of what autism is, it was like they're describing my daughter exactly. I really knew at that point that's what the issue was. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that it took a few years for me to go through a system and find therapy for her. Now you can imagine a person like me, with the type of connections and things that I have, I was able to get her into one of the therapy sessions, and I saw a transformation in her that was just remarkable. She was doing things that within a few months that I didn't think she'd ever do in her entire lifetime. And so when I looked at this and I thought, with or without changes in the law, my daughter's going to get what she needs, but the average person had no chance whatsoever in making sure that their kids got what they needed. And so it was important that I be the internal advocate in our system in order to bring this experience to bear on the lawmaking process, so that families that are struggling through the same thing, that don't have all the same opportunities that I have, that their kids get the same opportunities.
And she's doing a lot better now?
She really is. She's 6 years old now, and is doing great in her communication and her ability to operate independently and to get past some of the communication and the social deficits that characterize the symptoms of autism. And so it's a long road. It's a lifestyle change. It takes many, many years to make progress, and you have to keep on working at it. Mm-hmm. But when I see the progress that she's made, it is my hope, and the whole reason or purpose behind all the work I put into this is that I want other parents to experience the same thing with their kids.
Was it the original plan for you to sign the bill?
It really wasn't. It happened to work out that way because the governor was visiting Michigan National Guard troops in Afghanistan. That was a plan that was, or that was a trip that was planned long in advance, and the legislature just happened to pass the bill in that time frame, and so I was really honored to be able to sign it.
That must be, yeah, a very special moment, and when your daughter's older, you can, let her know and give her the whole spiel.
Yeah, that's right. And she was there when I signed it, and it was a real special moment. We brought in a lot of the advocates that worked with us. Remember, there was opposition from all the professional lobbyists, whether the liberals to the conservatives. They all opposed changing the insurance code for any reason. And so we had to overcome that, and it was overcome with literally hundreds, maybe over 1,000 autism parents that became amateur lobbyists who were brought to bear on the system and forced the change.
Lastly, Lieutenant Governor, what other reforms do you want to see regarding autism, whether it's insurance or treatment?
The insurance laws as they exist today, I don't think need any immediate changes. We're going to see how they work and evaluate that over time. But now that's happened, we need to do a lot of work to recruit people to develop the network. We need our health systems to develop a bigger capacity to handle a diagnosis for autism. Today, there's only a handful of health systems that provide diagnosis for the condition of autism. And so we need more of those. So just doing the work with folks to develop that network, for universities to increase their capacity in the creation of professionals that deal with autism is another important aspect. And then our primary education system. This is where I think we can make the biggest difference in the lives of families and kids, is that we need our individual education plans for our special ed kids with autism to include integration of their clinical therapy. And so for the goals of the clinical therapy to be coordinated with the goals of the education, that's where you really see the powerful results. It's a change in culture. This clinical therapy is something new in Michigan. It hasn't been available in the past. And the more that we can collaborate across the services that a child receives, whether they're in school or in the clinical therapy or at home, the more all of that can be coordinated to work together, the better the results will be for the student. And so I think that's the next big frontier for kids with autism.